shall discuss the types of corrosion. The metals undergo corrosion in various ways. Here I consider mainly four types of corrosion: differential metal corrosion, differential aeration corrosion, waterline corrosion, and pitting corrosion. Other than this, we may observe corrosion like intergranular corrosions, fatigue, then erosion corrosion, stress corrosion. Like there are many kind of corrosion we observe. In that, I'll first consider the first type of corrosion, what we called it as a differential metal corrosion. In simply, it is called as a galvanic corrosion. The galvanic corrosion arises like when two dissimilar metals, that means different metals, are in contact with one another and it is exposed to the corrosion medium, the corrosion environment. The metal with a lower electrode potential becomes anode and suffer from the corrosion. That is, when two dissimilar metals are in contact with each other in the corrosion conducting medium, galvanic corrosion occurs. The two metals having a different oxidation tendency, say copper and steel, they possess a different oxidation tendency. Their oxidation potential is different. So the one metal act as a very active and undergo corrosion. The one with the lower electrode potential or the more active metal act as anode and undergo corrosion, and the one with a higher electrode potential act as cathode and the metal is generally unaffected. Okay, like it is mainly due to the presence of two different metals and it is exposed to the corrosion conducting medium. As a result of different oxidation tendency, the metal with a lower electrode oxidation tendency, they undergo the metal with a higher oxidation tendency, not lower, higher oxidation tendency, they undergo corrosion and suffers from the corrosion. Whereas the metal with a higher electrode potential or reduction tendency becomes cathode and protect from the corrosion. And this type of corrosion, what we call it as a differential aeration corrosion. Here, this one picture, there is a two different metals are coming in contact with each other. So the metal with the lower oxidation potential is protected, whereas the higher oxidation potential metal first corroded. Once all it is consumed, then the environmental constituent attacks to the next metals. And the reaction is same. The anode reaction is metal is dissolved in the form of a metal ion and liberates n number of electron. The cathode reaction that depends upon the nature of the corrosion environment. The cathode reaction may be either evolution of hydrogen or absorption of oxygen. That is, it may like a reaction like H2 liberation if the reaction is taking place in an acidic medium, and like water moisture is present, it may take electron and forming hydroxyl ion along with the liberation of H2 is observed, and to balance this one, 2 moles of water interact with the 2 moles of electron forming hydroxyl and 2 moles of hydroxyl and hydrogen, or it may take place by the absorption of oxygen. So in the atmosphere oxygen is present, it combined with the neutral medium forming 4 moles of hydroxyl ion, or medium is acidic, H plus takes oxygen, takes 4 moles of electron and forming water molecules like this. So this formed hydroxyl ion combined with the positive ion and the corrosion of the metal take place. See, here I'll take a two metal like iron and copper, or even iron and zinc. When a zinc and copper, okay, metals are electrically connected and exposed to the electrolyte. Zinc metal is a higher in the galvanic series, forms the anode and suffer the corrosion, whereas copper is a lower in the electrochemical series, forms cathode, hence protected from corrosion. The extent of corrosion again depends upon the difference in the electrode potential of the two metals and also their relative area exposed to the exposed. If the potential difference between the electrode is high, the greater the extent of corrosion. Now we consider iron and copper with the iron and zinc. Iron and zinc, the corrosion rate of reaction is little less compared to iron with the copper because the difference in the electrode potential of the two metal is very high. And these are the few examples for differential metal corrosion. Here the steel is coupled with the other metals, like it may be a steel with the metal, like maybe other type of metals, the zinc metals or any other components. And here it may be the iron, both are iron, but one is an alloy, like another one is a steel and cast iron. So again we observe a differential metal corrosion. Like it is, are there some examples for differential metal corrosion, like when two different metals are coupled each other, like steel pipe connected to copper pummeling. Steel act as an anode, that you know. Steel act as a steel pipe connected to a copper pummeling. So steel act as a anode, whereas copper act as a cathode. Steel, whereas is copper usually unaffected, whereas steel undergo corrosion. Then next type of corrosion, what we called it as a differential aeration corrosion. The differential erosion corrosion occurs when one part of the metal is exposed to more or differential air concentration or oxygen than the other part. Okay. This type of corrosion occurs when one part of the metal is exposed to a different air concentration from the other part. Okay. The differential air concentration or oxygen concentration than the other part. Here one term is missing. Then the other. The part of the metal which is exposed to higher oxygen concentration act as a cathode, and the part of the metal which is exposed to a lower oxygen concentration act as a anodic reagent. Or in other words, the poorly oxygenated area undergo corrosion, whereas a highly oxygenated area is unaffected. So even in case of differential aeration corrosion, the metal at anode, that is less oxygenated area, is lost in the form of metal ion. Whereas the more oxygenated area, and at the area of more oxygenated area, the metal or it help for the reduction reaction. The moisture in the presence of oxygen takes electron, forming hydroxyl ion. So in other words, the corrosion of metals arising as a result of formation of oxygen concentration cell due to the uneven supply of air on the metal surface is known as a differential aeration corrosion. That is a corrosion of a metal, corrosion of a metal the corrosion of a metal arising as a result of formation of oxygen concentration cell due to the uneven supply of air concentration, air on the metal surface, is known as a differential aeration corrosion. A few examples for differential aeration corrosion is like Windows rod. Inside the frame suffers corrosion and it acts as an anode because it is a less oxygenated area, whereas but not the exposed region which act as a cathode. And even if you consider a paper pin, the paper pin which is inside the paper gets corroded, whereas the exposed portion is free from corrosion. Say some features. Say here, the area which is near the wall usually undergo corrosion. So here again this area is near the wall. Here it is less oxygenated. So less oxygen, whereas this area is more oxygenated. Here oil tank or water tank or pipelines buried under earth gets corroded due to lack of oxygen. See here, this area is remains unaffected, whereas this area is less oxygenated. The iron present in this area, it is like less oxygenated and undergo corrosion. Okay, less oxygen area act as anode and undergo corrosion. And there is like a zinc rod. If you dip a zinc rod in a dilute solution of neutral salt solution, the rod which inside the salt solution act as anode because it is less oxygenated. Whereas the exposed region, the other part, act as a cathode. It is a more oxygenated. So the electron transfer from less oxygenated state area to more oxygenated area. And that type of corrosion, what we call it as a differential aeration corrosion. The third type of corrosion, what we call it as a waterline corrosion. So these are the few examples for waterline corrosion. That is ocean going ships. You can observe here in the ocean going ship, here we can observe one brown colored layer. Above this region Above this layer, this ship is always exposed to a more oxygen concentration. That is exposed to atmospheric oxygen, whereas this area is exposed to dissolved oxygen. So it is a less oxygenated area. Or in other words, this is a case of differential aeration corrosion. It is a case of differential aeration corrosion. Waterline corrosion is a case of differential aeration corrosion. Even here, you can observe the pillar that is particularly used while construction of bridge. The pillar here, the fluctuation in the oxygen is observed in this area. As a result, it gets corroded, or it is a less oxygenated area gets corroded, whereas the other region is unaffected. Or in other words, here I'll take a waterline corrosion, water storage tank given. So brown color, a distinct line is formed just below the waterline, like, or even ocean going ships, like here just a brown color line is formed. This is a type of differential aeration corrosion, and it is observed mainly observed in a steel or a iron water tank partially filled with the water. It is generally found that the maximum amount of corrosion takes place along a line just below the level of water. Okay, discuss. Part of the tank just below the water level is exposed to lower oxygen concentration, particularly dissolved oxygen, and it acts as a anodic and undergo corrosion. The part of the tank above the water line, which is exposed to a higher oxygen concentration, act as a cathode and completely unaffected by corrosion, so that a distinct brown line is formed just below the water line. And this type of corrosion is observed in water storage, a steel tank, and even in ocean going ships. This is a case of differential aeration corrosion, because the one part of the metal is exposed to dissolved oxygen compared to the other part which is exposed to the atmospheric oxygen. And the type of corrosion called it as a waterline corrosion. Okay, this is an example for waterline corrosion. And the fourth type of corrosion, what we considered here, is a pitting corrosion. Okay, a pitting corrosion is a localized and accelerated corrosion resulting in the formation of pits, pinholes, or cavity around which the metal is relatively unattacked. So the example for pitting corrosion, see, I'll show you. So here, as a result of pitting corrosion, here a small holes are created, whereas relatively other area is almost unaffected. Here also, due to formation of pits or pinholes in this area, the metal area, it's a breaking of that particular length of metal is observed. A sudden failure in the equipment is observed. Here, the creation of small pits on the steel or sheets. Okay, so these are the examples for a pitting corrosion. The pitting corrosion is a most destructive form of corrosion. It is a most destructive form of corrosion, and it results in sudden failure of the equipments due to the formation of pits, pinholes, or cavity. Pitting usually results of breakdown of or cracking of protective film on the metal at a specific point. Say, I'll take this example. Here, a small mud or dust particle exists here. So, around below that area act as a anode. Okay, as a result, it acts as anode, whereas other area act as cathode. This is an iron metal. In this anode area, so corrosion of metal take place. Metal is lost in the form of metal ion, and progressively it moves and it reaches, resulting in the creation of small pits or pinholes. And the liberated electron consumed at cathode and forming hydroxyl ion and forming some corrosion product, that is a insoluble hydroxide, and further it attacks and forming hydrated ferric oxide. There is a final compound what is formed is called it as a Fe, so that is a Fe2O3 3H2O compound is formed, and a destructive form, a small pinholes or a cavity is created. Okay, whereas the other area is unaffected, resulting in accelerated corrosion at the anodic area. This is because formation of small anode and large cathode resulting in accelerated corrosion. So that's only written pitting corrosion is a localized accelerated type of differential aeration corrosion which results in the formation of small pits, pinholes around which the metals are relatively unattacked. Pitting is the most destructive form of corrosion. It causes sudden failure in the equipment. Pitting corrosion is characterized by a small anodic and a large cathodic area, resulting in accelerated corrosion in the anodic area. Pits formed are stimulating and help for the further corrosion. Pitting corrosion is also caused by the breakdown of the protective film or a metal surface, results in the formation of small pits, anodic area, and a large cathodic area. Pitting corrosion is generally initiated by the deposition of extraneous matter like sand, water droplets, etc. The metal below the deposit exposed to a lower oxygen concentration and undergo corrosion. The metal surrounding the deposit act as cathode since it is exposed to a higher oxygen concentration because of the small anode and large cathode results in accelerated corrosion. These are the different kinds of pitting corrosion, and the pitting that take place in the form of narrow and deep like it may be elliptical shape of fittings, wide, shallow type of fittings, like the subsurface fittings. Like different way, the metal undergo fitting that depends upon the kind of metal and the atmosphere. So these are the examples and the pictorial things that shows the fitting corrosion.